Bum 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 bum. Hello everyone. This is Bold Like a Leopard doing some coffee with Bold Like a Leopard, talking about our favorite country in the world, Mexico. Now, of course, everybody's talking about Russia. Did you notice that 2 weeks ago everybody was talking about Mexico and the border and families or whatever? Now you can't even hear a single word out of it. It's like they've replaced. Remember when I don't know if you guys, some of you obviously are old enough to remember Super NES, and you could basically change the. Let me see if I can. Yeah, here we go. Super NES, you had those game cartridges. You just pop one in, and you'd be playing a different game. It was fantastic. I'm sure all of you would agree with that. So that's basically that's the way that basically they're behaving with the news. The news agencies, they will basically go and pretend as if they can determine what's going to be important on the agenda. And then when an issue becomes really stale, even if it isn't resolved, then they start to object. I have Jeff Johnson saying that he emailed me to see if I was going live. I wasn't sure if I was going live, so sorry about that. My new schedule is not as viewer friendly as I would like, but you got to do what you got to do, and I can't be a full-time YouTuber, but I appreciate you guys. I will read your email at the moment. I'll read your email right now. I'm not going to read it on air, but I'll take a look at it. Yeah, so I'm sorry that I didn't notify you guys. I tried. By the way, Jeff Johnson, who is in the chat, wanted to try to do this thing where people could live chat on my channel basically 24 hours a day, and we tried to do it. I sent him a couple links. From what I could see, it didn't work as he thought it would. So, maybe we'll try it again. I'm not sure if it's necessarily going to work anyway. You see, I was, messaging back and forth with him yesterday, and I have to say that I'm glad people, that do tune into the channel, even if it's a few people, that they enjoy it, even if they're not even to appearances. Some of them don't even appear to be paying attention to any of the stories I'm talking about. I focus mostly on Latin America and issues over there, or issues that are, local problems. And there's really a mixed bag of topics with me. I'm not like one of those channels that focuses exclusively on George Soros or on Antifa or on SJWs or on feminism. And I like those channels, but it's not really the focus that I take. So for me, what's more important, honestly, and I said it to Jeff, is that people start to really pay attention to the stories that I have worked on, the ones that I've actually tried to expose, including the Mattis file, which unfortunately I don't think is really going to happen. And I have to say, and I'm kind of the eternal pessimist with that. It appears to be that people have really, there's two theories I have, that people don't have a true desire to actually resolve anything. They'd rather complain about it. Meaning, a lot of the people on the progressive side, I'm not talking about the people I featured in the story, but a lot of the people on the progressive side would rather complain about mistreatment on their part by the Democrats than expose the actual goings on of it and professional misconduct on the Democratic side and among the media. Most of us are listening to you and talking amongst each other too. Well, look. So anyway, the concept that Jeff was talking about, they used to go on Lionel's channel and basically use his stream basically to screw around and chat with each other, which I don't have a problem with. I find it a bit odd, and I don't know why people would want to do that. I mean, to each his own. I don't know why they want to do it on a YouTube channel's live feed when, on Discord, for example. And you don't have to use my Discord. You can just make your own Discord server. But you can do that, and you can actually record the messages. With a live stream, it's a little difficult to go back after a certain amount of time and look at the messages record. Okay, so if you want to go back and see what somebody else said, that's why I find it really bizarre when these guys do it. But I think the reason that they do it is because they're a little more committed to YouTube, and they're not trying to go look for a new platform to chat on. So we'll see. We'll try it again. I have no problem with trying it again with Jeff Johnson if we can figure it out. And I was watching the Lionel Nation stream for part of my lunch break today, and I was maybe it's because I had to step away, but I was expecting a little more. And the guy really has to keep a focus on his channel. Look, I appreciate Lionel Nation because without him, not just him, without other YouTube creators, including Derek Blackman, including Paul Joseph Watson, I think a lot of people would not go into working on YouTube and doing and creating things. Paul Joseph Watson, Stefan Molyneux, Lionel Nation, Anthony Logan, for example, somebody I've spoken to on the phone a number of times. I respect all those people. I still respect Lionel, but if you do an entire hour and a half and people they want to talk about the events of the day, and you keep steering the conversation away to 9/11, Willie Nelson, and Kate Spade and stuff like that, I really don't know what the hell you're talking about. And yes, there are times when my channel also drifts off into various topics that have nothing to do with each other. But at least I try to keep it focused during those actual segments. And with him, it's really become chaotic. That's why I prefer to watch his shorter videos. I told you the Lionel channel has lost 50 IQ points. L has bad 80. Yeah, I don't know, man. And he was like, Jeff was telling me some stuff yesterday that I don't really care about, but maybe, I mean, I'm not gonna say, don't email me, man, but you can email me with whatever topics you want to talk about. But I agree with Jeff on the point that Lionel is, his channel used to be amazing. It used to be great, and it just hasn't it hasn't advanced. So Pinochet is here. He says we can begin. Thanks for tuning in, buddy. We're going to talk about, of course, the Helsinki summit. And I find it, very disturbing that at this point in the presidency of whoever is occupying the Oval Office, people would rather focus on something that was alleged to have happened, that's a legal matter, that he can't change, instead of the things that are on the agenda in order to help the world, not be as shitty as it is. And Donald Trump made he sent out a clear message that his objective when going to meet Vladimir Putin was first and foremost, they're going to discuss China, which I think is necessary. Then there would be of course, the situation in Syria, the situation in Ukraine, the situation in the Middle East as a whole, and who knows, there were probably other issues that they discussed as well. Maybe they discussed how feminism is ruining the USA or something. Maybe they were discussing Andy Worski's channel, how it used to be the best channel on YouTube, and it just isn't anymore. Pinochet says Lionel is really convinced that Caleb Maupin has socialism all figured out, and it's only an economic theory. Well, I'm glad you brought that up, I'd like you to remind me to discuss that before we finish today. Lionel Nation and Caleb Maupin, but let's not get derailed. So before we finish today, Pinochet, I want you to remind me to touch on that topic, the Caleb Maupin topic. So here is the reaction to the Trump-Putin summit by Rand Paul. I want to say first that a lot of the people that reacted that were on the Republican side made a disgrace out of this country by trying to say that what Trump said was a disgrace. They made a disgrace out of this country because ultimately President Bush was meeting with Vladimir Putin, basically all the time, and Obama was also on on very close terms with Putin for much of his term until obviously things went south with that. So now they want to pretend that it's beyond the pale to even talk to the man. But let's say hypothetically, guys, that Putin had not, or let's say Hillary Clinton, God forbid, had been elected president. And, at this point in her presidency, do you not think she would have had to, she would have had to meet with Vladimir Putin? She would have had to go over either to Moscow or Helsinki, which is a neutral site as we see right now, or to Bucharest or Turkey or something, meet Vladimir Putin. That's the way it is. Nick's Radio says, "This is a little creepy. Your position like someone peeking at me through the window." Was it any creepier now? They're not so creepy anymore, is it? So we have Pinochet says deport the ginger. Yeah, absolutely, I agree. So welcome Nick's Radio, by the way. So we're going to listen to this. A lot of these conservative, so-called conservative people that they've really convinced me that conservatism doesn't really mean anything. Conservatism does not mean that you literally ignore, based on bizarre principle, you ignore the obligation of the U.S. to, the U.S. president to engage in diplomacy on a one-to-one basis with other leaders. And that's why, when I heard the quotes from Ben Sass's Twitter and from Lindsey Graham, and I was listening, I had to drive through the beautiful country, Geauga County here in Ohio, awesome scenery, and what was ruining it, because there wasn't any good music station that I could find there, was the sound of Michael Medved, the eternal neocon, complaining ad nauseum about Trump, bringing doubt to the intelligence community's bullshit assessments about Russia. And I want you to realize that when people brought up what Trump had brought up about the DNC server never being examined by the FBI or for that matter, any other law enforcement organization, let's say it's not the FBI, let's say you have a different law. I mean, why not the DC Metro Police? Somebody can examine the server. You don't have to have the server examined necessarily by the FBI, but for argument's sake, Trump correctly asked, why is it the FBI did not examine the server? Isn't this an investigation? Isn't the objective to get to the bottom of it? Well, Medved was saying, oh, that's just a bunch of nonsense. It has nothing to do with the investigation. He was trying to make it seem like they were asking about the Hillary Clinton server. No, it's two different issues. Two completely different issues. and by the way, I mean, why not investigate? Why not examine the DNC servers and the Hillary Clinton servers, as well as the servers of those congressional aides that were working for Debbie Wasserman Schultz? It seems that everywhere you go, whenever there's a massive scandal in the Democratic Party, they seem to believe that their IT, footprints are their private records, and nobody else can look at them. It's the same exact tactic that Hillary Clinton took in the 90s during the Whitewater investigation. It's the same exact tactic. For some reason, everybody, that's the two-tier system of justice. If you or anyone else, and then they complain. If you were anyone else, they would be raked over the coals for withholding potential evidence in a criminal trial. And then they complain about Michael Cohen. They say, "Oh, Michael Cohen, he should be thrown in jail for whatever, for crimes that you don't even know if he committed. Crimes that are not even germane to the Russia investigation." But anyway, let's hear Rand Paul. Pinochet says Rand Paul may just be the only actual conservative remaining in Congress. Look, I'm done with this whole concept of conservative or not conservative. This is just basic common sense people. Okay, I don't care if you're a libertarian. I don't care if you're conservative. I don't care if you're Christian. I don't care if you're Buddhist or atheist or whatever. If you don't think that it's part of the job of the President of the USA to meet with senior foreign leaders, including especially the head of the second leading nuclear power of the world, then you have no common sense. Then you're a piece of shit. And that goes whether you're a Democrat or a Republican or unaffiliated or whatever, or John Brennan of the CIA, whatever. What's up, Larry Gerke? Thanks for joining us. Let's see here. Rand and Jordan are the only two left I can trust. Used to like Trey. Seems maybe someone threatened him or his family. Yeah, Trey Gowdy, I think, is playing a very bizarre game, and I don't know what the hell he's up to either. But, I don't know what to do about it. And unfortunately, we all have to wake up and go to work and basically function while this soap opera unfolds, before us. Okay, so we're going to play the video. Let's see if we'll get through the whole thing.
Let's hear from U.S. lawmakers now on both sides of the aisle. I spoke a short while ago to Republican Senator Rand Paul of Kentucky, who is a member of both the Senate Foreign Relations and Homeland Security Committees. We started with a crescendo of reaction to today's meeting and how he sees it.
I think it's a good idea for us to have conversation even with our adversaries. At the height of the Cold War and the Cuban Missile Crisis, Kennedy had a direct line to Khrushchev. We've always had an ambassador, even throughout the Cold War, even during the years of Stalin, we had an ambassador to Russia. So I think it's a good idea to keep lines of communication open. We have nuclear weapons on both sides. We have conflict in Syria where we're in close proximity. It would be nice to have help from Russia on North Korea as far as denuclearization. We have the Ukraine situation. So, no, I think that we won't have any progress if we don't have any conversations.
I think a number of your Republican colleagues are saying they agree with that, but they're arguing the president went farther than that today. Senator John McCain called it the most disgraceful performance he'd ever seen by an American president.
Well, John McCain's been wrong on just about everything for the last 40 years. I'll give you an example. He's such a loose cannon and so emotional about issues that when I opposed the expansion of NATO, which many have opposed, George Kennan among them, the most famous diplomat of the last century, opposed the expansion of NATO as well. When I opposed the expansion of NATO, McCain said I was working for Putin. And so that kind of comment really doesn't even deserve to.
By the way, that's not an exaggeration. He said in the halls of the Senate, he said that Rand Paul is a Russian agent. And from what I remember, that there is a rule in the Senate that you're not supposed to impugn the character of another member of the Senate. Again, and they do that all the time now because it's constantly. I'll tell you the truth. There is no democracy anymore. There's basically a handful of normal people. I'd say you could say that Rand Paul is included there. A couple people in the House on the Republican side, maybe once in a while Tulsi Gabbard, who's a Democrat. There used to be Dennis Kucinich, by the way, who was one of the most Dennis Kucinich, like his policies or not. I'm just looking at this comment by the rapper, but like Dennis Kucinich's policies or not on economics, and I don't like them. But he was a voice of dissent. He was somebody who said, well, I'm not going to accept the position that has been taught to me by the intelligence community. The rapper 10,000 says, my community had a shooting that has been proven to be justified but Black Lives Matter and other activists want mob justice, not factual justice. So I think rapper 10,000 does live in Chicago. And I'm sorry, buddy, but I haven't really examined that story. And I have seen a couple videos are out there about it. I just haven't watched them yet, but maybe sometime either this week or next week we'll discuss them. It's just I don't have as flexible of a schedule anymore. Anyway, yeah, so let's keep watching this. By the way, notice that because of this, look at this line. PBS is an American public broadcasting service, which is literally the initials for PBS are public broadcast system. So I think they are. So this is all because of the whole Russiagate bullshit that they're now trying to, because allegedly Russia paid for a few ads on Facebook during the election. Now YouTube, in order to overcompensate for something that to begin with was not really as was not really an effective issue during the election, they now publish literally if you're watching state-run media, whether it's CGTN from China or Telesur from Venezuela or Al Jazeera, they put this stupid label at the bottom that says what country it's from, and it's like, if I want to watch Chinese news, I'm going to watch Chinese news. I'm intelligent enough of a human being to decide whether I believe what I'm watching or not.
Be countenanced, and really, I think polite company or informed company shouldn't even countenance someone like McCain, who basically calls someone who has an intellectual opposition to expanding NATO, calls them a traitor. So I don't think much of McCain's opinions on really any foreign policy.
All right, what about House Speaker Paul Ryan, who was not as critical, but he said Mr. Trump must, quote, appreciate that Russia is not our ally. In other words, the impression...
Yeah, but he never said they're our ally. He said several times that they're our competitor. And I think it's important. Everybody should recognize what that statement means. If a country is our competitor, it means we're not trying to necessarily destroy them. It means we're trying to defeat them. In a variety of ways. I mean, you can win. I mean, the scoreboard doesn't have to be in terms of kills. It could be in terms of money. I mean, would you rather kill a bunch of people or have more money? I mean, given the choice, I think most normal people, except in video games, which is a different issue, would say I'd rather have the money. The Clintons need to be arrested and charged with corruption charges. Putin just said the Clintons took $4 million from them. It was actually $400 million, I think, was the allegation. But I think this is going to be swept under the rug, and people are not willing to. You know what? I'm personally frustrated. I don't know if you guys can tell, but I'm still doing the channel. But when I tried to expose what happened with Rachel Maddow and those people who were smeared as Russian bots, who were just they were just a couple of Bernie people. I haven't received any, literally any coverage except from a small handful of people like Halsey News, the hard bastard who I wrote the article on his channel for, and Jamal Thomas, who I think he also has a active interest in it. But people have very little strategic thinking when they look at stories. They'd rather say, well, people are not going to care. Well, they will care if you work hard and try to drill it into your head. What Lionel Nation's channel has succeeded in doing, and you can criticize him all you want, is he talks about 9/11 literally all the time, and now people have started, a lot of people who didn't before. I'm not going to say multitudes of people, but a lot of people who didn't before have started to question the official report on 9/11. Pink Pony, welcome. Says he or she is wet with excitement. Okay, I guess. I mean, is this because Judy Woodruff is in front of the screen? Is that what's getting you wet? Anyway, so let's keep playing.
That he's saying that came across as the president was simply too friendly with and too trusting of Vladimir Putin?
Well, I think the president's different than many leaders we've had who basically will litigate things to death and not meet with people. I think Trump is different than he's willing to meet with foreign leaders. And actually, I think you may get a breakthrough because of the meetings. And I think if this were anybody else, if there weren't such acute hatred for Trump, such a Trump derangement syndrome on the left, I think if this were President Obama, and it could have actually been President Obama early in the first term when they were trying to reset our relations with Russia, that could have easily had a meeting like this, and the left and the media would have had a love fest over President Obama. So I think this
Okay, this is a point that people repeat all the time, and he's correct, but it doesn't matter anymore because we've already established that things that are permissible for other politicians are not permissible for Donald Trump. It's really like this. There's a hierarchy of different rights that they extend to different presidents according to how much the media likes them. So certain things they would allow Presidents Reagan and Bush to do, Bush the first, like like basically engage in a drug war while simultaneously, dealing with narco traffickers in South America and also, by the way, selling arms to Iran when we were embargoing them. Just to be clear, the Republicans themselves are kind of full of shit on that count. At the same time, that with Bill Clinton, they literally let him get away with almost anything. Almost anything. Bombing Kosovo. Why? Because it's not fair. You're going to you're going to involve us in Somalia? Oh, okay. Well, what? Our troops are going to be basically dragged through the streets like dead animals. Fine. What? I guess you had to take your frustration out by getting blowies from your intern. I guess you get a mulligan, President Clinton. So they let President Clinton get away with literally anything. President Bush could get away with less than that, but he could still get away with getting us involved in a bunch of wars. Two wars that are still tremendous disasters for America economically and in terms of foreign policy and prestige. And then he basically screws our economy, gets us into massive deficits, and nobody cares. People look at it. The only reason they care is because now they can use it in order to get Democrats more power. They don't care about the actual fact that the U.S. is in massive debt, and the military and the military and industrial complex has basically run us into this ditch, right? So they don't care about that aspect of it. What they care about is the fact that George W. Bush did it. So they're in other words, they're fine with him doing it for them because that's the policy that they want for America. And then Barack Obama, of course, could literally do no wrong in terms of personal conduct. He was basically treated like the golden child, and like Christ himself or something. And he passed the worst domestic policy bill ever, the Affordable Care Act, the worst domestic policy bill in the history of the United States of America. I mean, maybe there's other ones you could argue the 16th Amendment or you guys. I mean, the Prohibition or whatever. So there's some ones that are up there. This is the one. This is the one in my lifetime I would say is the worst domestic policy that I've lived through. See here. Okay. Pinochet, Rand will condemn wars, taxes, and corruption. The media then spins his comments to be anti-American. Pretty much. Hi, Desert Pioneer. Welcome back. I hope, by the way, say hi to Alicia Clegg next time you're on her channel. I haven't been able to watch as often as I want to. Pinochet, the rapper says, I'm starting to think the war is needed to oust out these Democrat leaders turning good communities into ghettos by their own hands. BLM is their only weapon. Well, it's not going to fix itself. until basically there's some sort of in some of these cities there's going to need to be some sort of complete convulsion. I thought that would happen in Milwaukee when there were the riots there, but people haven't learned a thing over there. Milwaukee continues to be the same type of city it was before the riots.
It really shows people hatred for President Trump more than anything.
Do you think the president, Senator, was right to essentially accept the Russian version of events? Vladimir Putin said, no, we didn't interfere in your election. And yet the entire intelligence community in this country has concluded the Russians did interfere. The president today was siding with the Russians. How do you read that?
I'm not so sure I would describe it as siding with the Russians. I would say that President Trump has a healthy dose of skepticism towards our intelligence community, and I share some of that. I mean, James Clapper came before the Senate and lied. He said
it's a massive, massive understatement on the part of Rand Paul.
They weren't collecting our information. That's the biggest bold-faced lie that we've had in decades, and nobody did anything about it. James Clapper lied to the U.S. Senate about collecting our data. You now have John Brennan, whose first vote was for the Communist Party, now calling President Trump a traitor. And so these people have really exposed themselves or revealed themselves as great partisans, and yet they had the power to snoop on any American, to snoop on any person in the world, and believe you me, they were scooping up everybody's information.
But Senator, it's also the current heads of intelligence who are saying they believe the Russians interfered. Dan Coates, the director of national intelligence, said last week, there's no question the Russians interfered. Today, he put out a statement, we'll continue to provide unvarnished, objective intelligence in support of national security. He's saying he's on guard for Russian interference.
Yeah, and I'm not saying they didn't interfere with the election. In all likelihood, they did. There's a guy named Dov Levine from Carnegie Mellon who looked at this from 1946 to 2000, and he found 81 times in which the U.S. intervened in elections and about 36 times in the Soviet Union. None of it makes it right, but any country that can spy does, and any country that can intervene in foreign elections does. And so, yes, we've been involved in Russia and their elections. We've been involved in the Ukraine elections. And we say it's for democracy, but we don't support the Russian party. We support the pro-Western party. And we paint ours as if ours is always just on the up and up, but we get involved in foreign countries' elections. And so, yes, I think we've elevated this Russia thing to a degree that we are simply...
So yeah, that's exactly what... But you know, this isn't only Rand Paul that has said this. And if you talk to, if you discuss this with idiots like Michael Medved, or you know, even this Joe Walsh clown who I saw also put out a statement, they say, oh, you know, stop deflecting or whatever. No, the truth of the matter is that the U.S. meddles in other countries' elections, Russia meddles in other countries' elections, China meddles in other countries' elections. There's a number of countries that meddle in other countries' elections, and it's not good, but it happens. It's not. It might be unfair. You should criticize it. You should definitely say that it's, or you know, if you want to make it an issue, you have to pass laws or take measures that would be effective in countermanding it. Or sorry, it's not. It wouldn't be countermanding, but you know, counteracting it. That would be the word for it. But instead of doing that, they would rather create this hysteria over things that did not happen, things that they can't prove. Pink Pony says that clap is slang for gonorrhea. Oh, you learn something new every day. If you've seen the semi that was stopped in the highway live on TV surrounded, that was one of my father's trucks. 3 of his trucks got diverted downtown. We drove the 3 hours to get them out. Are you talking about Chicago right now? Is it worse than I thought? Because I didn't know that there were like full-on riots there. I mean, let me know. Lightning, just let me know what you guys are talking about in terms of trucks getting surrounded.
Deranged by it. We are accusing President Trump of all kinds of things that I do not believe he's guilty of. But did the Russians get involved in it? Yes. And what I would tell the Russians is exactly what I've told their ambassador and others is, if you thought it was going to help things, it's actually backfired, because there can be no rapprochement with Russia, no engagement with Russia because of the meddling in the election.
So, Senator, you don't think Vladimir Putin got the best of President Trump today?
No, not at all, because the thing is that we dwarf all other powers now. Europe's army, I think, is 13 times bigger than Russia's army. Us plus Europe, we're probably 30, 40 times bigger. We spend more on the military than the next 10 countries combined. There's not even a real comparison between the two. We are the sole remaining superpower, but I still think engagement's good even when you are the sole remaining superpower.
Senator Rand Paul of Kentucky, we thank you.
Yeah, okay, you were talking about Ferguson. To Pinochet's point, exactly, and this last issue that Rand Paul is bringing up, that the U.S. has, our military spending is seriously, and I'm not one of these idiots that says, let's cut money from the military and put it into healthcare. I say cut the money, period, from both healthcare and the military, period, and not even invest in either of those. If there was one thing I think we should invest in, we should, if we say, let's say the money's already been collected, I would say you distribute them to the states or something. I don't give a fuck. Then they can do whatever the hell they want to do. If, Wyoming wants to make some sort of stud farm for a bunch of ponies, pink pony, then go ahead. I don't care. I would rather, by the way, I would rather state governments spend the money, and we see exactly, because the state government is more accountable than the federal government. I would rather that happen and these politicians get voted out every 2 years or every 4 years than have it be the way that it is now. So no, I'm absolutely for cutting the military budget, cutting the defense budget, which is one of the main areas where I disagree with Donald Trump. And I'll disagree with him, even though I do respect his, he's the president of the U.S. Cut the military budget, you cut welfare spending. If anything, we could, if you want to do something, cut all of that military spending. You could put it at that border, the border security and the wall and everything. You can invest more in cyber security. Let's make a military that's smaller but smarter. Does anybody have an objection to that? You withdraw more troops from Italy and other countries that we haven't had wars with in upwards of 70 years now. What's the problem there? Yeah, that's pretty screwed up, Lightning. With the trucks and the Kalashnikovs. So that's enough with Rand Paul. This is what Bernie Sanders said, the fraud. Bernie Sanders before 2016 was a different person. I believe Bernie Sanders, if he would have won the election in 2016, would have at least adopted some, I don't think he would have been as good as Trump at it, but he would have adopted more of a non-interventionist foreign policy. That's one of the few areas where I think Bernie Sanders is actually better than Hillary Clinton, better than the Democratic Party, better than a lot of the Republicans, is that he's an anti-interventionist. I think he's a little screwed in the head as to why he thinks so. But you can see here, he says, how pathetic Republicans who tell us how much they believe in freedom and national security are now caving in to a president who sides with former KGB leader Putin rather than our own intelligence community. Is that really Bernie Sanders talking? Doesn't Bernie Sanders remember? I mean, he's old as fuck, so he must remember the 1970s Church Committee hearings in the Senate, but led by Frank Church, the last Democrat elected senator in Idaho, that exposed all of the abuses of the CIA and the intelligence community during the Cold War. So he wants to shove all of that under the rug. And by the way, the CIA never changed. They remained the same during their entire, since then, it was basically water under the bridge. Church died a young man, by the way. I think he died at age 62, which is pretty young compared to most senators. We can look it up real quick. Frank Church. who I think is, it doesn't matter what party you believe in. He might be one of the last great American lawmakers. He returned the Panama Canal to Panama. I think, he was an important man, and we would be a much better country if we had a couple more like him. He died at age 60. This is a World War II veteran, military intelligence guy from the Far East Theater. We could use some more people like that, but we don't have them. We don't have them from either party. It's really a disgrace that we don't have people from either party. There's a few people, and we've already discussed who they are, but it's not enough. We need a true transparency party in the country, a transparency party that will, you don't have to believe literally everything that Julian Assange says in order to understand that he has much more credibility than the intelligence agencies that have defamed him. So this is what he said. And even Winkle the Bernie bro, who I've messaged back and forth with, says, stick to domestic issues, and when going on foreign policy, stick to getting us out of pointless wars. This shit with Russiagate isn't really helping you. And then you got some fan people. So you have some people freaking out about it. Take them down, Bernie. Yeah, right. Bernie's taking himself down with this bullshit. What can we, the American public, do? What can you do? Please tell us, and the support and action will be instantaneous. So then they're hyping up. They're hyping up his stupid town hall today with, for the Fight for 15 bullshit with the, these workers from Disneyland and Amazon and whatever. I'll tell you what. If you end up working for Amazon or whatever, Disneyland or whatever, Disney World, I'm sorry, but I don't think you necessarily. I mean, with all due respect, the fact that your job sucks does not mean that you deserve $15 an hour. Okay, there's a lot of people whose jobs are awful and they don't make $15 an hour. There's a lot of people who if you want to work really hard and make a lot of money, why don't you work on an oil rig? And I'm no big fan of the oil industry, but there's jobs like that. If you want to work really hard and make a lot of money, why don't you become a plumber? Why don't you try one of those trades? Eventually, if too many people work in that field, you make a little less money because the market becomes diluted. But it's an idea, guys. It is an idea. People think that, I work. I mean, I deserve $15 an hour. What do? I choke chickens for, an adult theater downtown. I'm sorry. I don't believe that you're entitled to $15 an hour. Okay. That's. I mean, am I being unreasonable here? I've worked some shitty jobs in my life. I think most of my audience has worked a few shitty jobs in their lives. Some of us have been in the military. I know Larry was. I was in the military as well. And, at a certain point you have to realize that the world is not your oyster unless you become a fisherman. I mean, what am I supposed to say about that? He says, President Trump's press conference with Putin was an embarrassing spectacle. Rather than make clear that interference in our elections is unacceptable, Trump instead accepted Putin's denials and cast doubt on the conclusions of our intelligence community. This is not normal. This is Bernie Sanders basically caving into the Democratic Party, becoming the total fraud that I've known him to be since summer 2016 when he endorsed Hillary Clinton. Okay, if you had such a commitment to the integrity of a federal election, maybe you should have fought harder against the party that robbed you of any chance of winning. I'm not going to say that he would have won, but he would have had a better chance if he would have fought harder and stood on principle and stood up for his voters and stood up for his donors and stood up for, you know, the idea that we have a transparent democracy, that our you know, these parties aren't our lords. They're supposed to represent a vision. There is no vision for the Democratic Party. By the way, there's no vision. If today taught you anything, there's no vision for the Republican Party either. With these people saying, this is a disgrace. You know, Trump is basically caving into Putin. You want to know what the real story was today? You have to go to fucking Xinhua news agency in China. It says Trump and Putin agreed to strengthen cooperation in Syria and anti-terrorism. That's the important thing. If we could get less people dying in Syria, I don't think we should be complaining. Okay, we should be probably clapping. We should probably be toasting to this. It says U.S. President Donald Trump and his Russian counterpart Vladimir Putin on Monday agreed to cooperate on issues. Well, they did have a typo here. Sorry. What happened? Concerning conflict in Syria, anti-terrorism, and nuclear disarmament. The scourge of radical Islamic terrorism was also discussed at the meeting. Trump said at the press conference after the first one-on-one bilateral meeting of the two leaders, adding that they agreed to work together to deal with the issue, he said. Trump said radical Islamic terrorism made both countries suffer. They have agreed to maintain open communication between security agencies to protect their citizens from this global menace. As we have discussed, the crisis in Syria is a complex one, but our cooperation between the two countries has the potential to save hundreds of thousands of lives, said Trump. Yes, probably. I mean, possibly. I mean, do you think it's better to keep doing things the way we've been doing since 2011 when the Syrian civil war broke out and just let people continue to die? And then every year there's more and more migrants leaving Syria as refugees. And yet people are saying, we need to admit more refugees, but we should also continue to bomb the fuck out of that country. You've been coughing like Stormy Daniels on a cucumber. I've had these coughs for a long time, buddy. So sorry about that. I can't help it. I've actually asked doctors about it. I think it might be an allergy or something. I might have to see an allergenist. Putin called on the United States to work together to resolve the Syria conflict. Russia and the U.S. can take the lead on this issue in this country and work together to overcome the humanitarian crisis. Putin said the two presidents considered it necessary to further work together to work out the entire complex of the military, political, and disarmament dossier, including the extension of the Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty, the dangerous situation surrounding the development of elements of the global system of American missile defense, and the implementation of the treaty on the elimination of intermediate range and shorter range missiles, as well as avoiding weapons being placed in space. So the U.S. and Russian delegations have been working. Okay, so there you see that they're eating food together. You see people were complaining that Trump was in the meeting alone. So yeah, he had a face-to-face meeting with Putin for 2 hours. But the other people were, this is John Kelly. You have, this is Pompeo. I believe that Ambassador Huntsman is the guy behind Trump over here, and that's John Bolton, the weird-ass walrus, who's his national security advisor. So, look, you can't obviously you can't be happy about everything that happened today. I happen to be much more happy than I was the day before with what happened at the meeting. I'm not happy about the way our country has reacted to this. We're going to have to discuss things with Russia again and again and again over the course of the future of this country, unless we get into a nuclear war. But barring that possibility, you should expect the United States to have correct relationships with other countries around the globe, including Russia, including China, by the way. I criticize China all the time, but I don't want us to go to war with them. See here. All right, so that's enough about that. We also have see, let's get rid of that. This was Rand Paul the day before, talking about basically the same thing.
How much do you want President Trump to?
And I know you guys are thinking that I'm really sorry about all this Build-A-Bear stuff, but I'm actually looking for a present for my nephew. So there's all these Build-A-Bear ads. So anyway, you got, I'm talking a lot about Rand Paul. And I understand the guy isn't for everyone, and I'm not telling you who to vote for. But I wish there were more people speaking out and talking about the need for our country to have basically correct relationships with other major countries around the world, including Russia. So, I would, if Bernie Sanders had come out tonight and said, this was a positive step forward. We need to get it. We need to resolve the issue with Ukraine. By the way, I think it's bad that Putin invaded Ukraine. I have a lot of Ukrainian friends. I get criticized for, some people say Ukraine is a Nazi country. That's what was the line for many people before 2016. Before 2016, a lot of liberals were saying, I'm not getting my nephew a pink pony. In any case, 2016 was the point where people stopped caring about, the fact that Ukraine does have a significant right-wing militia over there that's explicitly racist. But even if it does, I think that both Russia and Ukraine have really shat the bed over there. What are they fighting over? Basically, the right of either country to small patches of land on the eastern frontier between Russia and Ukraine. I think you can legitimately criticize both of their conduct there. Can you still be racist if you have Ukrainian friends? I don't know, man. But I have friends who are Ukrainian, and they stand on the principle that their country has, the right to Crimea and the right to Donetsk and Lugansk, over in the east. So what am I supposed to say? That we should intervene explicitly on behalf of Ukraine, fight Russia in a land war over there in Eastern Europe? I'm not going to support that. But I would support the U.S. mediating between them two. Pinochet says, look up who runs Ukraine now. The Svoboda party, absolutely fascist. I don't care, though, because this is a line often used by people on the left who say, well, this country is run by some right-wing fascists or whatever. They say the same thing about the Philippines. I don't give a fuck if they're run by Darth Vader. Okay, because we can't run Ukraine. Okay, we can't run the Philippines. That's one of the reasons our relationship with the Philippines was wrecked under Obama. So I'm sorry. And by the way, I'm Jewish, and my family came from Ukraine, and they were persecuted by Ukrainian ultra-nationalists and fascists. This is one side of my family. The other side of the family is from Iraq. So I don't have sympathy for the belief system of these people. But I have a recognition that we can't run the affairs of a country like Ukraine, just like we can't run the affairs of a country like Russia. Lulu Panda is here. Welcome. Thanks for coming in. Larry Gerke says, Duarte is great. Yes, whoever Duarte is, he's probably amazing. Let's get through this short video.
Try to hold Putin accountable for that.
I think really we mistake our response if we think it's about accountability from the Russians. They're another country. They're going to spy on us. They do spy on us. They're going to interfere in our elections. We also do the same. Dov Levin at Carnegie Mellon studied this over about a 50-year period in the last century and found 81 times that the U.S. interfered in other countries' elections. So we all do it. What we need to do is make sure our electoral process is protected. And I think because this has gotten partisan and it's all about partisan politics, we've forgotten that really the most important thing is the integrity of our election. And there are things we can do and things that I've advocated, making sure it's decentralized all the way down to the precinct level, making sure we don't store all the data in one place, even for a state, and that there's a backup way that someone in the precinct can say, 2,000 people signed in. This was the vote tally I sent to headquarters. There's a lot of ways we can back up our election. advertising and things like that, it's tricky. Can we restrict the Russians? We might be able to in some ways, but I think in the bottom line, we've wanted the Russians to admit it. They're not going to admit it the same way we're not going to admit that we were involved in the Ukrainian elections or in the Russian elections.
Okay, so this is something that Pinochet mentioned about the Ukrainian elections, and they're not just an election. I think back in there was also an uprising in Ukraine that Pinochet was bringing up, the Euromaidan. That part of Ukraine was in favor of it, Western Ukraine, and part of it, Eastern Ukraine, was not in favor of it. So there's adverse outcomes out of every intervention. It's why it would probably be better if the U.S. was much less involved in any of these countries. Should we still be involved in Italy? Which countries they can probably be good resources for us, and they can look after their own affairs.
All countries that can spy do. All countries that want to interfere in elections and have the ability to, they try.
It sounds as though you are saying that the United States has done the equivalent of what the Russians did in the 2016 election, and it might sound to some viewers that you're offering that statement as an excuse for what the Russians did.
No, what I would say is it's not morally equivalent, but I think in their mind it is. And I think it's important to know in your adversary's mind the way they perceive things. I do think that they react to our interference in both their elections. One of the reasons they really didn't like Hillary Clinton is they found her responsible for some of the activity by the U.S. in their elections under the Obama administration. So I'm not saying
but surely,
it's morally
Senator Paul, the
equivalent.
United States has never
justified.
the United States has never done what Russia did. Yeah. Okay, go on. I'm sorry.
I'm not saying they're equivalent or morally equivalent, but I am saying that this is the way the Russians respond. So if you want to know how we have better diplomacy or better reactions, we have to know their response. But it's not just interference in elections that I think has caused this nationalism in Russia. Also, I think part of the reason is we promised them when James Baker, at the end, when Germany reunified, we promised them that we wouldn't go 1 inch eastward of Germany with NATO. And we've crept up on the borders, and we still have neocons in both parties who want Ukraine and Georgia to be in NATO. That's very, very provocative, and it has stimulated and encouraged nationalism in Russia. George Kennan predicted this. In 1998, when we still had Yeltsin and Russia was still coming in our direction, he said, if you push NATO up against Russia's borders, nationalism will arise and their militaristic tendencies will increase, and you may get someone like a Putin, basically. George Kennan predicted the rise of Putin in 1998. And so we have to understand that for every action we have, there is a reaction. And it's a big mistake for us not to say that we're morally equivalent or anything Russia does is justified. Don't realize that everything we do has a reaction.
All right, so yeah, I agree with Rand Paul on this. I agree with Rand Paul on the majority of topics. Okay, so if you're wondering why I continually bring him up, because it's because I don't see a lot of other people saying this. If Dennis Kucinich was still in Congress, I'm sure he would have probably argued it from a more left-wing perspective. But you see, even today in the U.S. Senate, the most left-wing member, Bernie Sanders, can't, basically grow a dick and say that and tell the truth. Tell the facts that we need to have a productive relationship with other countries, including Russia, including China, including Ukraine. By the way, I'm not saying we should throw Ukraine in the garbage. So Lightning says, I will appreciate the info. I've got cousins in Ukraine and they're pro-European and not Russian, so I'm confused. You have to understand, my family, they grew up this was a couple generations ago. They grew up in Western Ukraine. And over there is much, 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 much more, pro-European. It abuts Poland and Romania over there. And Moldova. So the ties with Russia are a little weaker. So they're more militant about the Ukrainian language and some of the more different issues of Ukrainian culture, which are, they're distinct from Russia in certain ways. In other ways, to be honest with you, I don't always see the difference. But it's over, okay? You know, in eastern Ukraine, a lot of the people are more sympathetic to Russia because the linguistic ties are more, you know, the linguistic ties in eastern Ukraine are closer to Russia. There's more Russian-speaking people in eastern Ukraine than there are Ukrainian speakers. So, you know, it's not like I'm saying that one side is better than the other, because after all, Russia perpetrated a number of crimes in Ukraine during the Soviet era. But people are going to have to get over this and you know, move on and find a better way to resolve this issue than basically going after you know, going after Russia literally every day over something you can't change. Yeah, I heard about that phone call, Pinochet. So that's it for the Ukraine and Russia issue. We're going to go to Ocasio-Cortez and then do a little more about Venezuela and Nicaragua, of course, and Iran, by the way. So this was her on PBS's Frontline, or Firing Line. And basically she got a plum interview and she didn't really make the most out of it. Let's put it that way.
I'm still impressed by dial-up. A social media influencer who can sell policy and sell out lipstick with a single tweet. There is no denying she is the progressive it girl, as much for her ideas as for her sheer political talent. A campaign worker wrote, Ocasio-Cortez is as articulate as she is relatable, as charismatic as she is fierce. In the last 2
Yeah, she doesn't turn out to be that articulate in this interview.
weeks, she has become the vanguard of the American progressive movement. And should she be elected, she'll also be the youngest woman ever to serve in the United States Congress. Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez, welcome to Firing Line.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Your win was such a shock, and it was because you worked hard. That's the first point you always make, is that you outworked your opponent.
It was all shoe leather.
Look at how hot this reporter is. By the way, she works for you because this is PBS. So just so you know, she works for you. Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't expect somebody this attractive to work for a public corporation.
The term democratic socialist is a term that young people hear very differently than old people. And I wonder if you could expound on what that term means to you.
Yes, you know, I often say that, to me, democratic socialism is the value that in a modern, moral, and wealthy society, no person in America should be too poor to live. And for me, what it really means is establishing a baseline level of economic and social dignity in the United States, to say, no matter what happens, we're not going to go below this level, that we should aim for every person in this country to be covered by health care, to have access to a full college education, as well as trade school, and to make sure that people feel stable in their housing.
All the goals that you are...
All right, I'll propose my alternative plan, which I think will be much better than this. To solve all three of those problems, you give people a weekly stipend of, Bacardi miniatures, a box set of Goosebumps instead of as education. If you remember Goosebumps, those of you that grew up in the 90s, fantastic series. And basically, you know, a lawn chair. A lawn chair or a tent, either one. And that should be fine. Anybody needing, a shower can run through the sprinkler. But in all seriousness, there are homeless shelters around the country. The real issue with homelessness is to provide, first of all, to deal with mental health. She talked a lot about health care. I find it bizarre how many people talk about public health care, universal health care, that are not medical professionals, or they're not. I mean, I have worked in a number of fields that involve medical devices. Okay, design mostly. And it takes a lot of people to do it. One person cannot do the one thing. I was actually watching in the past couple of days fascinating stuff about Theranos, that company run by Elizabeth Holmes. That was apparently some sort of fraudulent Ponzi scheme, attracting investors among the most powerful, George Shultz, the Republican Secretary of State. And, it takes a lot of money and effort to create, the means to help people heal. Whether it's drugs, whether it's obviously treatments, and educating health professionals, whether it's doctors or nurses, and then they have to pay for their whatever it is, their insurance. I'm talking about malpractice insurance, things like that. They never address those issues. They never address the issues of how drug policy is to be done. How to, you complain about big pharma. Okay, I'm not happy with big pharma either. What's your alternative to it? The government will not develop these drugs either. The alternative to it, in my mind, is decriminalizing a number of these recreational substances, or allowing people to go into some of these holistic practices, promoting a more healthy lifestyle among our nation's youth. By the way, I did miss going to the gym today. So, this is beyond just providing universal health care. The universal health care is just the system by which people are covered. It doesn't actually encourage people to be healthy. So Lennon McCarthy is here, by the way. The latest episode of Comrade Trumpsky is out on Lennon McCarthy's channel, by the way. So I saw it already yesterday. So go over to his channel sometime and check it out. Now let's continue with this interview.
Articulated, I aspire to as well. Yeah. So what is it about democratic socialism that to you makes it the best vehicle for achieving those ends?
I come from the background as an organizer. And in this moment right now, this political moment, democratic social, or perhaps even DSA in particular, is one of the only active organizing groups in the United States that is actively asserting that. I think that so many people tap into those values, and it's not so much about selling an ism, a color, a party, an ideology, as much as it is asserting and advancing the basic aspects of.
Yeah, she's weaseling out. She's really weaseling out on that on that note, because it's an ism. Democratic socialism is an ism. It's not. I mean, if you want to talk about belief systems that reject that. By the way, Rastafarians are against all isms. They don't believe in communism. They don't believe in capitalism. They don't believe in socialism. They don't believe in anything like that. I'm not sure exactly what. I think they believe basically that the emperor of Ethiopia was God, and beyond that, I'm not really that savvy about them. But she's basically weaseling her way out of this. Let me see here. Ryu Siska says, I don't eat bacon or bagels, and he will accept me more for having a spin and not following like a sheep. What are you guys talking about? Huh. Yeah, it seems he's getting into... Let's see. Yeah, that's a weird argument you guys are having there. I don't know what the hell. So anyway, yeah. Larry Gerke says, Hail Selassie, highly unlikely. Well, that's what they believe. What do you want from me?
Human dignity in 2018.
So you mentioned DSA. In case our viewers don't know what DSA is, it's Democratic Socialists of America. And what's really interesting is that it has increased its participation significantly in the last few years. In 2016, there were only 6,500 members of the Democratic Socialists of America. In 2017, there were 23,700, and by July of 2018, there are 44,000 members of the Democratic Socialists of America, 216 chapters across the country, and particularly buoyed by young people.
I want to ask, why is that so surprising that they would have big memberships jump? There would be enough people who want to pay the dues for that when there were so many people who were going to shell out $27 to waste on Bernie Sanders. It doesn't surprise me at all. And by the way, I mean, I welcome the fact that more people are joining these idiotic organizations, because as much as I mean, the Democratic Socialists of America, they're full of crap. we do need a little more variety in the American political system. I wish the Libertarian Party was was intelligent enough to actually believe in something. Instead, they basically fight over who gets the who pays for the cookies and coffee at their conferences. That's basically that's what's going on in the Libertarian Party today. How can we ban more people from coming? And because we want to make the party more inclusive, so we ban Tom Woods and Ron Paul. And who pays for the cookies and coffee?
People. Yeah. So explain, in your view, what it is about democratic socialism that appeals to millennials and young people.
Well, I think that for our generation, we kind of view the world through a very different lens. In my life, for example, I was born in 1989, and so at that point, I was growing up during the Clinton era. And then basically when I was in middle school, 9/11 happened. So when you think about young people, it's important to think about the general timeline, the world that we grew up in. I was about 17, 18 years old when the financial crisis hit. We never experienced really a time of true economic prosperity in the United States, and a lot of what we have witnessed is the unprecedented concentration of wealth at the very tippy top of the 1%, and we've seen the consolidation of corporations start to really erode our wages, really erode access to health care. And so I think young people are very receptive to a very strong economic message of dignity for working class Americans.
That was really your rallying cry in your campaign. It was always about working class Americans. You talk about the top versus the bottom, not the left versus the right.
Right.
Now, the economy is going pretty strong, right? There's roughly 4% unemployment, 3.9% unemployment.
So I haven't heard her answer to this, but it'll be pretty interesting. I think she's getting bored, so let's see what happens.
Do you think that capitalism has failed to deliver for working class Americans, or is no longer the best vehicle for working class Americans?
Well, I think the numbers that you just talked about is part of the problem, right? Because we look at these figures and we say, oh, unemployment is low, everything is fine, right? Well, unemployment is low because everyone has 2 jobs. Unemployment is low because people are working 60, 70, 80 hours a week and can barely feed their kids. And so I do think that right now, when we have this no holds barred wild.
Okay, I want to say this. If you work 60 hours a week because you can't feed your kids, there could be a number of factors in play. Either, you have too many kids, or they're garnishing your wages for whatever reason. It could be because of that. It could be because, you owe child support, or you're in a buttload of debt for whatever reason. Okay, this is what's ridiculous. Okay, my mom also worked for a number of times. She did work 2 jobs. Besides that, she worked as a nurse. She's passed away a few years ago, but she worked as a nurse. She worked night shift, 12 hours a night, probably 6 nights a week, and made a lot of money doing it. And that's part of the bargain of being a nurse for most nurses in America, so far as I remember. It could be different. I don't know if any of you people in the audience are a nurse. But this is somebody opining on the reality of life without acknowledging it, that there could be a number of reasons why people would end up working 60 hours a week or however long it is, and not being able to afford, enough, afford a decent life for them and their children. It could be because of their own mistakes. If they've had too many children, or God forbid, their child is disabled and they don't make enough, or they're not receiving enough support from their community, or the government. Let's put that on the table there. People have differing circumstances. And, she does not acknowledge the reality that we live in a country where no 2 communities are really exactly the same. A person working 60 hours a week in a city like Houston is probably living much better than a person working 60 hours a week in a city like, Los Angeles, because it's much more expensive to live in Los Angeles. And they never really stop to think about why it's so expensive to live in Los Angeles, why it's so expensive to live in a community like Queens, where she comes from, or no, she's from the Bronx, whatever it is. She claims she's from the Bronx. There's economic factors that drive the cost of living up, and she does not. What they would rather do is engage in price fixing. They'll just make it worse, and they'll make your money worth less.
Wild West hyper-capitalism, what that means is profit at any cost. Capitalism has not always existed in the world, and it will not always exist in the world. When this country started, we were not a capitalist. We did not operate on a capitalist economy.
You know, the benefit of capitalism is that you engage in voluntary trade, and that because it creates value, it is the system that, unlike all the others, has lifted more people out of poverty over the course of human history than any other system.
Well, so I think that those things that you talk about, that you discuss, are part of the course of human evolution. And so I would hope that the most recent economic system, our current economic system, is the one that is most beneficial for everyday people. But what we're also starting to see is that, first of all, I think that when we talk about socialist or especially democratically socialist economies, first of all, they're done with the full input of everybody. You vote. It's democratic. So if something is not a good idea, it doesn't get voted for, ideally. And the other thing, too, is that we're starting to see that the people who create value in society are not experiencing any portion of the value that they are creating. And so experiencing that it's democratic. So if something is not a good idea, it doesn't get voted for, ideally. And the other thing, too, is
that's a blatant, embellishment of the truth. You can look at any country that has claimed to be democratically socialist, and the democracy does not really work the way she's talking about. You don't. I mean, what she's talking about more are kind of worker communes, which there's no. I mean, if people want to do a worker commune, they can do it right now. Carlos is arguing with Pinochet. It's going to be funny. In a democratic socialist country, you can make the argument that some of these countries that already have been socialist are democratic socialist. Nepal, which is run by Maoists, is technically democratic socialist because the Maoists came to power through a democratic election there, and they've displaced the king. But the decisions are not made in a democratic manner over there. They're made by basically a directorate, the Politburo or any other leadership body at the top. And it never works the way that she's talking about it. It's basically a hallucination. It's like she's the matador waving the red cape in front of the bull. The bull is the people, and they charge and they take this whole democratic socialism nonsense. And then once they're through the red cape, the deception is unveiled, and then the democracy actually gets relinquished, and you get something called socialism. And it's called socialism until people realize that it's essentially the same thing as in any other dictatorship. You just have power concentrated at the top, and people having to relinquish a lot of their liberties. For the good of the public. It's not only socialist countries that do that. There are a lot of right-wing dictatorships that do the same thing. This is just the reality of living in an authoritarian country. But she's going to continue with this whole nonsense about how the USA needs to adopt that type of cooperative society. And you'll see how vague and it's just a bunch of fluff in the air, as far as I'm concerned, whenever she's talking.
That we're starting to see that the people who create value in society are not experiencing any portion of the value that they are creating. And so I do think that absolutely capitalism was the most efficient and best economy, perhaps for the time that it was at, perhaps. But as we evolve, as automation begins to really take out extremely large industries, we need to say that we're not going to throw those people away.
So in the context of democratic socialism then, do you think it calls for an end to capitalism?
Ultimately, we are marching towards progress on this issue. I do think that we are going to see an evolution in our economic system.
Yeah, that's not a straight answer there. She doesn't say, I mean, it has to be, you have to say what you're marching to. You can't say that there's progress in a certain direction if that direction isn't spelled out.
Of an unprecedented degree, and it's hard to say what direction that takes. You know, I joke
but it sounds you're skeptical that capitalism is going to continue to be the right answer.
Yeah, I think it's at least a question. I think it's absolutely a question.
One of the first guests ever to appear on Firing Line was a gentleman by the name of Michael Harrington, who was the man who was behind Lyndon Baines Johnson's War on Poverty, and he wrote The Other America.
The war on poverty that never ended and is still going on right now. I mean, I guess we're doing really well at that.
And he was also the initial organizer of Democratic Socialist Organizing Committee, which preceded the Democratic Socialists of America. So I have a really fun clip from that show that I'd like to show us, and then we'll comment on the backside. Let's take a look.
Absolutely.
I don't like capitalism. I think it's much less than, I think it's a mythological system in that we talk of free enterprise, but we have gigantic concentrated corporations. But I agree that it is exactly the magnificent accomplishments of American enterprise and capitalism and business, and the kind of dog-eat-dog misery that we went through that now makes it possible for us to be decent. And I think that when we finally do get a modicum of justice in the society, we should revere those dog-eat-doggers who did make it possible.
Well, perhaps contempt was too strong a word to describe your feelings on capitalism. I was struck by that sense of yours which goes, practically every ethical, moral, and cultural justification for the capitalist system has now been destroyed by capitalism, which some people would find contemptuous at least.
You can see Buckling and Harrington mixing it up 50 years ago, more than 52 years ago, about the values that you and I are still trading back and forth.
Okay, so basically that clip shows William F. Buckley, who's a pretty smart guy for his time, and he's kind of considered the founder of the intellectual conservative movement in the U.S., and he's criticizing Harrington, saying, well, how can you just have said that free enterprise should be, maybe I missed something, but from what I understood, Harrington said, the capitalism has accomplished a lot, and we should respect it. And Buckley pretty much pulled a quote on and said, well, you said, basically there's no justification for capitalism. So let's see what she says about this.
Wow. I'd love to shift this conversation towards higher education and your plans for higher education.
So I am a really firm believer that the next step in our education system is opening up colleges and trade schools to be tuition-free in the United States. About every 100 or so years.
Well, let me stop this for a second. If you want to go to a community college, at least in my state, you're almost paid to go there for free by FAFSA. I don't know how it works in New York State, which it could be that New York State is just fucked in the head, because community college is actually rather cheap. It's not very difficult to pay for community college, and you do get in many of these places, if you're ambitious enough, you can get a good education. Community colleges are underrated in the country, and many of them include trade schools. So come on. This person is not seeing the landscape for how it is. And by the way, on a federal level, this is a shitty idea. Community colleges have to be the initiative of exactly what it says, communities. If you have a city, let's say Toledo, where there's a need for more people in a certain industry, that community college should be able to say, well, look, we need more pipe fitters. We're I know you guys are going to go wild with the whole pipe fitter thing. So, the whole metaphor. If Pink Pony's still watching, make a pipe fitter joke. But if they need somebody in, let's say, the laying tile, they need people who are good at laying tile. People who are, there's a big need for the industry of metal brazing, whatever it is. That community should have absolute control over that part of the curriculum. Now, as far as funding goes, I've said already, I think that the U.S. government should decrease military spending, decrease spending on all entitlements across the board, including medical entitlements, and distribute those funds to the states. And the states can decide how to do it. The states, if they want to increase, let's say California wants to do universal health care. I have personally no problem with that. If they want to do that for their state, knock yourself out. But if let's say Missouri wants to invest that money in, improving their infrastructure or whatever, it should be their discretion. And then from years coming forward, the federal government should reduce its tax burden on the public, and gradually we'll become just a country where states are more, they're more responsible to their citizens. The citizens will be able to vote out politicians if they screw up these projects. Let's see here. We had Carlos said something, but Lightning says, my wife's medical education was 80% paid for by subsidized grants and loans, meaning her 7 years ended up costing us about $60K for a pulmonology degree. Anyone can go to college. Carlos says, I think New York just passed free tuition for a bill for community colleges. So I think the majority of what she said has already been accomplished. If they're talking about giving free college being a 4-year university like, Texas A&M, then I'm not in favor of it at all. Free ponies in California too, but only for illegal aliens.
We extend our public education system. When we first started in the United States, people, if you were lucky, got a grade school education. And then we as a society decided that wasn't enough, and we made universal middle school. And it wasn't until, a lot of people don't realize, it wasn't until about 1950 or 1960 that we truly achieved tuition-free universal high school in the United States. And you know what? We're now out another 70 years, and I think that as our economy evolves, our education needs to evolve. Our publicly available education needs to evolve. So I believe in tuition-free public colleges and trade schools. In addition, we have an amazing opportunity to, at the same time, that's how these policies work, they have to be interlinked, pursuing a program of federal student loan debt forgiveness.
There's definitely a couple theories about how encumbering student debt is and university student debt is on individuals and whether it's preventing them from participating in the economy. And there are some studies, there's one from the Brookings Institution and others, that suggest that actually
Oh boy, the Brookings Institute. Prepare for a bunch of bullshit.
larger deterrent to people participating in the economy is the demarcation point of whether one has a college education or not having a college education, rather than college debt. I think about it, in 2016, there's one study I read that said the amount that people are spending, the average family is spending on student debt is roughly equivalent to the amount the average family spends on entertainment costs per year. In other words, it's not always so crippling, but that the more crippling factor is whether you have a college education or not, because your earnings are so much higher if you do have a college education.
Yeah, I would counter, because first of all, when you look at the rising amount of student debt, and then the fact that wages are largely remaining flat in the real wages are remaining flat in the United States, some families may be spending as much on entertainment as they are on student loan debt, but you look at inequality and generational inequality. Some folks have parents that are able to support them, And one of the largest drivers of wealth inequality in the United States is inherited wealth. So especially, really what we need to talk about is this question of social mobility.
And that's, as somebody who comes from the center right, one of my major concerns as well. Is I'm less concerned when you have a lot of wealthy people, as long as you have individuals who are at the bottom part of the economic ladder that have access and ability to move up to become part of that upper echelon. There's one other piece about education that strikes me because it's so biographical about you. And one of the things that you say as you talk about education is that no child's destiny or set of opportunities should be determined because of the zip code they were born in. I've heard you say that a lot. And your parents actually made the choice to vote with their feet and to move outside of the district that you were born in, or the zip code you were born in order to.
All right. I think what she's doing is that reporter, who I don't even know what her name is, but she's pretty smoking hot. And Ocasio-Cortez is pretty nice on the eyes as well. I know people are making fun of her eyes, but those are usually from kind of selectively taken freeze frames, such as the one right now where she does look like she's a bit bored. But this interviewer, I think, is trolling her to a certain extent.
To afford you better educational opportunities. To many people in this country, that would make you the poster child for education reform, especially because that terminology, the zip code terminology, is one that I first heard by Michelle Rhee, who was the chancellor of the District of Columbia's public education schools, who became a little bit controversial for challenging some of the union wages and education reform. Where do you stand on K through 12 education reform?
Well, I think there's a lot of...
By the way, most of the people who focused on this interview are focusing on a little snippet that's going to come later. But I think these are the most important areas, the education and the labor issues.
Aspects to K through 12 that we need to reassess. Things like No Child Left Behind has left a wake of lessons for us. We have to strike a balance between not kind of watering down every child to a bubble on a test and a test score. Sometimes an over-reliance on that can hurt our educational outcomes. I think that, honestly, one of the things that we really need to reassess when we talk about economic inequality and reducing economic inequality is our basic system of funding schools. The basic idea that the immediate property taxes of a certain zip code funds that local public schools. Because then what it does, it creates this mad dash. I think by kind of re-examining how we even fund schools is one of the basic things that we take for granted, but it could actually be one of the strongest keys in unlocking the opportunities of children in the United States.
Another area where...
I'm going to say this, and, if it makes me a dick, I guess it makes me a dick. These people are dancing around in circles, and what they don't understand, and we had... Pinochet says there's an obvious attempt by the left to keep pumping out radicals on the taxpayer's dime. It's insidious. He's talking about the radicalization of college campuses. There's a different problem that nobody's talking about, which is that a lot of the poorer people who end up going to college, but they drop out, or, they get a degree that's bullshit, such as, in sociology or something, they also end up getting their girlfriend pregnant, or getting pregnant themselves if they're the woman or the man now. So those people who they end up becoming single mothers or single parents, and then they want to talk about how the education system isn't working for them. Well, maybe you shouldn't have banged Julio down by the schoolyard. That's basically the real issue here. You have to keep control of your life until you're able to live in a situation where you're earning enough to provide for a family. Okay, education in and of itself does not really it does not really solve the issue of creating a vibrant and thriving workforce, unless the people are getting degrees or certifications that allow them to function well in the economy that is. There's already an issue nowadays, and we'll cover it a different night. I can't go through it tonight because there's already too much to talk about, including Hillary coughs. The issue is that there are a lot of technical jobs out there, and there are some jobs that I looking back, I should have taken some of them or considered them as a career choice. That there's nobody to fill them. There's nobody to fill them, and instead people are getting degrees in fields that nobody can. There is no work in them. So let me see here. Len McCarthy says you can learn to be a libtard at community college for cheap. More people should just do that. Carlos says student debt needs to be looked into seriously. It really hurts people starting to circulate money in the market. Student debt is a problem, but there's two sides to the problem. One is the federal government and the lending institutions that lend them out. And the other are the people who take the student debt, the people who go to institutions of higher learning that they don't really necessarily. I mean, if you're trying to go into a field such as, if you're trying to go to business school, there's no reason you need to go to you necessarily need to go to the University of Miami, which is I think it's like 60,000, or no, it's not 60,000 a year, but $40,000 a year or upward. There's no reason you should have to go there when you could go to Miami-Dade College or something. There's plenty of school. People have to realize what their boundaries are instead of taking out all this student debt. And yet, people like this lady in the interview, Ocasio-Cortez, they absolve the people who take the loans out of any responsibility as to what the outcome is going to be, because they took the bait. They were offered this basically free money up until the payment comes due, and they took it. So what are we supposed to say? Oh, you're not supposed to. You don't have to pay your debts out anymore. Look, you're part of the problem too if you took these loans out.
You've been really outspoken, and you went even on a visit to Texas before your election. Right. Is immigration control, immigration reform, and the horrific incidences of separating children and their parents at the border. And one of the things you've called for is the abolition of ICE. And as you've talked about it, I've noticed that you have said what it would afford us is an opportunity to really rethink our immigration system. And one of the things I've also really appreciated about how you've approached immigration is that you've noticed that Republicans haven't always been anti-immigration reform.
Right, that is absolutely correct.
And I worked in the Bush administration around the time that you were working for Ted Kennedy on comprehensive immigration reform. Yeah. If you had the opportunity to really reimagine.
Yeah, he's the real gems here. One worked for a warmonger, and the other one worked for, Mary Jo Kopechne's murderer. Well, not murderer, but manslaughter, woman slaughterer.
Imagine it, right? Beyond the conversations about ICE. So what would be your priorities?
I think we have to look at it in the context of greater policies. What our foreign policy is, what our local criminal justice policies are, tend to have a very large impact on who's coming in and who's coming out. We have always legislated from a place of how do we exclude and who do we exclude? And I just think that that's the wrong question. I think what we need to do is we look at our foreign policy, for example. When we decide to intervene militarily in a place abroad, I think that in that same conversation, we need to say, how many refugees are we willing to accept as a consequence of our involvement? We need to have those conversations right there in the same time and place, because I think it will force us to
Yeah, that's a good question, and unfortunately it has nothing to do with whether you should abolish ICE or not.
Recognize the consequences of our decisions, the potential consequences of our decisions. When we talk about, foreign trade, or when we talk about regime change abroad, I think that we need to have discussions about what that would mean on our shores and what that would mean for the potential of human migration.
It seems to me there is this debate on the far left or the progressive left about whether low-skilled immigration is acceptable, and so I wonder if you had the ability to really start from scratch, would you do it? Would you? Bernie Sanders has even laughed at sort of open borders as being like a Koch brothers program, and Bernie Sanders, right, who is
the Koch brothers.
A person that you organized for, but who was vehemently opposed to the 2007 immigration reform bill that was passing through the Senate. So which side of the sort of fence do you fall on?
So I think this is a really good question. When it comes to low skilled immigration, I think that the problem with taking that approach is the assumption that people coming in are only weights or only have like some kind of parasitic relationship to the U.S. economy. And that's not true. Every single person is a source of economic activity, I think. And what we see is that immigrants are one of the...
No, they're not only a source, that they can also be a draw. This is basic idiocy, okay? Every spot that there is, every job post that there is, let's say there's a post for, construction worker or something. Well, the person who occupies that post occupies it, and then there's other people who might be in line for a similar job who can't take it. So the whole "they took our jobs" argument, it does make sense. If you're a person, some backwoods hick from Arkansas that works in construction, and you're typically driving into what's next to Arkansas? Is it I think on the on the east side is I believe Kansas is there. So no, Tennessee. So let's say you're driving. Now I have to look at a map. That's how ignorant I am. Let's see. Let's look at Arkansas. Look at a map here. I know this is embarrassing because we talk about Arkansas all the time. Yeah, Tennessee. So let's say you're used to driving in from the backwoods of Arkansas over to, into Memphis. And then, suddenly you see all these other people are taking your damn jabs. They took our jabs. So, yeah, that's a real problem for you. I'm not sure what Ocasio-Cortez would have to say to that backwoods hick from Arkansas. And I don't think she's really catering to that public anyway. But let's say it's not the backwoods hick from Arkansas. Maybe it's some dude who's, he's Mexican-American born in Arizona who works in construction. Let's say he's some sort of, you could pick a lot of these other fields. And these illegal immigrants do create a labor issue. What are you going to say, that they don't? That basically, illegal immigration does not affect our economy in any adverse way. There could be some positive effects, but there's obviously some negative effects too. So this is a dishonest approach to the illegal immigration issue. And, it's just ridiculous that people keep letting her get away with it.
The most entrepreneurial populations in the United States. My district alone is 50% immigrant. You will not find more vendors in New York City than you will find here. And so this idea that something is low skill and that it's going to be a weight, I think is probably a false lens.
Do you think that when people say low skill, though, they think it's a weight on the economy? Because I think of it as sort of the robust driver of the economy.
Yeah, I would hope more people would take your perspective. But I think, especially now with this current administration, the narrative is the amount of jobs in America are finite and that it's zero sum, and someone that's low skill is going to take my job, which is false.
You have not really needed so far to take many foreign policy positions because...
So before we move on to the foreign policy positions, which are what really got her into hot water this week, look, what she's saying is basically, that the economy can expand and contract, that you could have more jobs depending on how the economy is managed or less jobs, etc., which is absolutely true. But in any case, you have to look at it on the local level. If you're, again, let's think about Arkansas, Tennessee area. If you have a lot of illegal immigrants coming into that area and there simply isn't a lot of big economic development in Arkansas, then yes, they are taking those people's jobs. Yes, there are people who probably live in Arkansas and Tennessee who could be working who don't try to. So that's a totally different issue, separate from illegal immigration, but it has to be addressed. You have to tell the people who refuse to go and work in some of those jobs that it's therefore their fault if they're not willing to take them up. If there are people who are impoverished, who basically have no prospect, who pick up their stakes and leave, let's say Guatemala in order to come here and abandon everything, but they're dirt poor, then there's no reason that there can't be a population here in the U.S. of other poor people that she's also talking about that can't do the same thing and get the jobs that are already here.
You were seating a Democratic incumbent, but now you are very likely going to be going to Washington, and you'll have to sort of build out some of those foreign policy positions. You, in the campaign, made one tweet or made one statement that referred to a killing by Israeli soldiers of civilians in Gaza, and called it a massacre, which became a little bit controversial. But I haven't seen anywhere. What is your position on Israel?
Well, I believe absolutely in Israel's right to exist. I am a proponent of a two-state solution. And
yeah, she's going to get some heat from the Palestinian side, more so than because Israeli supporters are already recognize her as kind of a hostile actor anyway. And I tend to say if she has an opinion on it, I'm fine with her taking either position. But you'll see what happens when she delves deeper into this.
For me, this is not a referendum, I think, on the state of Israel. For me, the lens through which I saw this incident as an activist, as an organizer, if 60 people were killed in Ferguson, Missouri, if 60 people were killed in the South Bronx, unarmed, 60 people were killed in Puerto Rico, I just looked at that incident more through just as an incident. And to me, it would just be completely unacceptable if that happened on our shores. But I am...
Of course, the dynamic there in terms of geopolitics and the war in the Middle East is very different than people expressing their First Amendment right to protest.
Well, yes, but I also think that what people are starting to see, at least in the occupation of Palestine, is just an increasing crisis of humanitarian condition. And that to me is just where I tend to come from on this issue.
You use the term the occupation of Palestine. What did you mean by that?
I think it...
So this is really where they kind of hammer her.
What I meant is like the settlements that are increasing in some of these areas and places where Palestinians are experiencing difficulty in access to their housing and homes.
Do you think you can expand on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'd also just, I am not the expert on geopolitics on this issue. You know, for me, I'm a firm believer in finding a two-state solution in this issue. And I'm happy to sit down with leaders on both of these. For me, I just look at things through a human rights lens, and I may not use the right words. I know this is
That's very honest. That's very honest, and you're going
issue.
I mean, it's very honest. And when you get to Washington and you're an elected member of Congress, you'll have the opportunity to talk to people on all sides and visit Israel and visit the West Bank. And
absolutely. And I think that's one of those things that's important too, is that especially with the district that I represent. I come from the South Bronx. I come from a Puerto Rican background, and Middle Eastern politics is not exactly what's at my kitchen table every night. But I also recognize that this is an intensely important issue for people in my district, for Americans across the country. And I think what's at least important to communicate is that I'm willing to listen and that I'm willing to learn and evolve on this issue, like I think many Americans are.
As a millennial progressive.
So let's dissect that a bit. And I don't think people are really blowing that portion of the interview out of proportion to the rest of it, because she talks about a lot of issues that are more important to Americans than the Israel-Palestine conflict. She talked about education. She talked about illegal immigration, even though she won't say the words illegal immigration. She talked a lot about student loan debt, universal health care, issues like that. So people are unfairly really zoning in on this one, zooming in on it. But to be fair, she really fucked up that question. And people are comparing it to the Gary Johnson Aleppo moment. And I'd like to say here that even though I'm not a fan of Gary Johnson, even though Gary Johnson kind of made me say, well, if this is what libertarianism has to offer, then I think I'm an independent. I'm not going to even affiliate with any party. Gary Johnson, the Aleppo moment was not his fault. He did not prompt it. He never talked about Aleppo before. He didn't care about Syria. His entire issue was mostly, when he was running for election, it was kind of the more superficial Cato Institute style libertarianism, which is basically it is open borders and free trade and lower taxation and legalizing weed. Basically, that was his entire platform: legalizing weed, gay marriage, open borders, and free trade. So the whole Aleppo moment, which Mike Barnacle initiated on MSNBC, was an ambush of his. He didn't give a shit about Syria. And to be honest with you, if you're running for president, you do need to have a little handle on international issues. So it is a little bit of an embarrassment, but you can't blame somebody who never cared about the issue for saying, no, that I don't really care about. I mean, essentially what he should have said was, that's not really what I'm running on. And I don't care. So it was a screw up by Gary Johnson. This is worse because Ocasio-Cortez has made statements about the Israel-Palestine conflict. She has engaged in activism in that sphere. Well, whether you like it, you can agree with it, you can disagree with it. So therefore, she has to be open to criticism and to questions about this. And then what does she end up saying? She fudges the whole question, saying that the issue for her is that the occupation and the settlements are creating an issue of access to housing for the Palestinians. That's not really the issue over there. Access to housing is not the issue because the goal of the Palestinian resistance, or if you want to call it that, the goal of the Palestinian cause is to create the right of return, to have the Palestinians have the right to return to, within the 67 borders of Israel, the pre-1967 borders of Israel. That has almost nothing to do with housing, okay? Because unless obviously you have to consider where they're going to live if they were to do that. No, these people, these people who support the Palestinian cause, if they can't articulate why they're doing it, then really they deserve a lot more blame than Gary Johnson did for Aleppo, because Gary Johnson didn't care about Aleppo. Ocasio-Cortez was virtue signaling in May about the Gaza March of Return, that it's basically a human rights issue and everybody and these are crimes against humanity or whatever. Okay, you want to take that position, you better be prepared to defend it. That's all I'm saying. I'm not telling her not to speak out about it. I'm not trying to rake her over the coals for this, but this is a tremendous collapse on her part.
How do you reflect on President Obama's legacy?
I think for me, I try to look through President Obama's legacy through as clear eyes as I possibly can. I think that he mobilized. I certainly phone banked for him in 2008 as a young college student. And I think that I acknowledge that he came in and his administration came in at a very difficult time. He came in the pitch of a financial crisis. He came in to just, I think, unprecedented obstructionism from the Republican Party. He came at a time when I believe that the Republican Party started putting party over people. Mm-hmm. And that has created just a very destabilizing dynamic. I think that he tried. I think he did his best. I do have my critiques. I think that we got a little bit...
Yeah, she's dodging the issue because it's much more easy to criticize Donald Trump than it is to criticize Barack Obama. And by the way, back in the day, the Democrats, I remember, would criticize George Bush. They almost never talk about him anymore. They don't even care. And then, George Bush I think in many respects he was over criticized when he was president, but it doesn't mean he shouldn't be criticized. I criticize him certainly all the time. But basically, they were behaving when he was president as if he was, almost an invalid, like some sort of retarded child that listened to, like Dick Cheney was basically his brain or something. I think that's an oversimplification. With Obama, she's basically giving it, he really tried hard and he really wanted to do good, but he didn't end up doing it. Fuck you. He was a president of the United States. Okay, and if you're not willing to implement a real vision of what you want for this country as president of the United States, then that kind of means that the office itself is meaningless, if that's what you think about it.
Too corporate friendly in terms of policies, in terms of how we recovered from the financial crisis. I don't agree with all of our foreign policy and drone strikes, but I also acknowledge that we did make progress during his presidency, and I do think that it's my responsibility and our generation's responsibility to build on that.
Well, with any luck, you'll be going to Congress, and you'll be able to do that, hopefully, when you get to Washington. The set of skills that it took for you to canvass...
All right, now, notice that what she said, and, by the way, there's some amazing legs in this interview. But what she said was basically when you get to Washington, you're going to get a chance to deal with these issues. Well, they're basically assuming she's going to be elected already, which is probably, honest and smart. I guess, yeah, her name is Margaret Hoover. Okay. I think I've heard of Margaret Hoover. I believe Margaret Hoover used to be on Fox News, by the way. But listen to what I'm saying here. They're already assuming that Ocasio-Cortez is going to be in Congress. And yet in this interview on PBS, she basically affirms that, she's way too unprepared to be in Congress. Granted, in the next few months, she could, develop a lot more skills and, build up her qualifications in terms of knowledge and everything. But in this interview, I think it's a total flop.
The 14th District of New York, to identify who your voters could be, to get them registered and to the polls, was an extraordinary feat. Mm-hmm. And it's a set of skills that got you to the point now where you're going to go to Washington, and now you have a whole new set of challenges in terms of
Again, she's assuming she's going to go to Washington because people are already expecting her to win the election, because there's an expectation once you win the Democratic primary in New York City, you're basically elected. And that's not really a choice, in my opinion. There ought to be more parties. By the way, I don't think that necessarily the Republicans should represent her district either. But to assume that she's going to go to Washington because she happens to be the Democratic nominee, that shows, basically that this is a country where there's different, territories that are cut out for each party. And democracy is by the way, in the district I live, we're virtually guaranteed to have a Democrat as well.
Integrating the ideas that you've espoused and been elected on into a Democratic establishment that is pre-existing. Mm-hmm. So have you thought about how you're going to be effective as a spokesperson for a new set of ideas?
I actually don't think that once you win an election, you put down your clipboards and you just head to Washington and you use a totally different set of skills. There are certainly additional skills that you need when you get there. But I'm a firm believer in the fact that organizing never stops and organizing never ends. And I actually believe that there's a profound amount of power, persuasion, and influence that's possible when you organize outside that chamber to really impact what's going on inside that chamber. And one of the things that we kind of talked about on our campaign was people versus money. And I think that when you can organize a mass amount of people, you can create a lot of pressure on incumbents to change. And so for me, it's not, I don't intend to put down my bullhorn. I think that if anything, we've been trusted with a much larger one. And my constituents have hired me. Mm-hmm. They have voted for me to be a very fierce and unapologetic voice in Washington. And I don't think that that necessarily means antagonistic. I don't think that it means that you fight for the sake of fighting, but I do think it means that you don't compromise your values and your message. And I hope to at least be that kind of voice of clarity in Washington in a time when there seems to be so much discord.
Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez, we here at Firing Line wish you much luck and success in your endeavors and hope that you'll return to the firing line to discuss the ideas that you continue to be a proponent of when you get to Washington.
Oh, thank you so very much.
All right, thanks very much.
Thank you.
All right.
Firing Line with Margaret Hoover is made possible.
All right, yeah, I was hoping they would make out, but, you know, some dreams don't come true. I mean, you socialists should understand that. But look, Ocasio-Cortez, I think this was a failed interview, and I'll tell you why. And I don't know if it's all her fault, but this is what I think. She was a radical running for Congress during the primary, and she won. She defeated an establishment reptile, basically lizard person, if I can channel Alex Jones for a second. Jokingly. Okay, I don't know anything about Joe Crowley, so I don't know if he's a lizard person or not. But let's leave the possibility open that he is. So in any case, she defeated him. And then there was this massive spotlight cast on her, both by the progressives and by, you know, the rest of the Democratic Party that were thinking, well, holy crap, now we have to deal with this. Now she's basically feeling the pressure to at least bridge the divide between her and the liberal establishment in the Democratic Party. And she's not used to it, and it's going to be very difficult. By the way, Margaret Hoover, I'm pretty sure. Let's look her up. I think she was on Fox News in the past. I don't know why she would move to I don't know why she would move to PBS instead, but apparently she used to be. Yeah, she used to be on the O'Reilly Factor. So, yeah, this is. I don't like her. I like the way she looks, but I think she's basically a fraud. She's part of this whole Ana Navarro style modern conservatism. And that's why, you know, I believe we should be, as Americans, whether you're on the left or the right, you should try to be independent. Stop taking a label. You know, if you believe in the free market, believe in the free market. If you believe in socialism, I mean, keep shopping at Hot Topic, because, but being independent, because these labels don't mean anything. But she did give a good interview. You have to hand it to Margaret Hoover. She looked very fetching doing it as well. You know, she's the great granddaughter of Herbert Hoover, apparently. But she's one of these, you know, hardcore, open borders type people, George Bush style Republicans, and I'm tired of it. I'm tired of having to listen to these people, even though she did a good job at the interview, claiming that they represent a viewpoint. You don't represent a real viewpoint. You represent basically a corporate image. That's the corporate image you represented on Fox News. And now that it's a little harder to do that on Fox News, even though you still can, because obviously Shepard Smith, that weirdo, works for them, you do it on PBS. If you're working for PBS, as long as it continues to receive taxpayer money, you're kind of a joke in terms of conservatism. PBS should be dismantled or sold off to basically some dude like, you know, I think we could sell PBS to some weirdo like Steve Ballmer, the guy who owns Microsoft, and nobody would feel different. It's the same viewpoints that he has. You know, by the way, I'm going to mention this in passing today. Another idiot neocon. I mentioned earlier Michael Medved, but there was Hugh Hewitt, who was in the morning, was proposing that Amazon try to compete with Twitter by creating a safe, paid subscriber-only version of Twitter. and therefore he believes that all of the hardcore trolls and the people who shitpost on Twitter, they would be gone, and it would be basically everything good about Twitter. He doesn't understand that. That's why people even join. That's why people join Twitter. That's why people join. That's why there's these. I don't know how these people got into my channel, but they're obviously here for a reason. They're not even talking about my topic, but they want to be in a place where they can shitpost, and that's part of the desire for people to be on social media or on in order, whether it's on YouTube or whether it's on minds.com or on Reddit or whatever. People have a desire to express themselves, and it's not always in a very civil manner. So Hugh Hewitt can go suck it, because that Amazon idea would go up in flames. Nobody wants to be on basically a super censored version of Twitter that you have to pay for. Why wouldn't you just go on Twitter for that? Because Twitter does do censorship. That's it. I do want to mention in passing, I'm sorry I didn't get it to go into it. We'll probably do a little more elaboration on it tomorrow. But you have, there's more dead in Nicaragua. Okay, nobody's really discussing that. Everybody wants to discuss a press conference in Russia where nobody died. Nobody died. Nobody's head exploded. But people are dying in Masaya and Managua and other parts of Nicaragua. And a lot of people are going to end up coming to our borders because of a domestic, meltdown over there. Then you have Iran and in Iraq, by the way, southern Iraq, which is basically run by Iran, by Iranian-run militias. You're also having riots, also due to an economic crisis, partially due to American sanctions, which I think have not even ramped up all the way. So you're seeing, like, around the world where there is basically authoritarian leadership, whether it's a religious dictatorship like in Iran and Iraq, or in Nicaragua where it's more of a left-leaning dictatorship. And who's to say this won't happen in a right-leaning dictatorship like the Philippines or Ukraine? But people who live under tyranny and don't get what they need in order to have a viable way forward will end up rebelling and possibly reaching our shores. Now, do you think that it bodes well for the countries that they come from, for those people to leave and they end up, the country itself never improves and we just keep getting this steady drift of people coming here? I don't think so. I think we have to encourage those countries, especially by diplomatic measures, to resolve their issues and create a more free society. By the way, also, it says Venezuela pleads guilty. This is a typo, but a Venezuelan from PDVSA has pled guilty. Luis Carlos de Leon Perez pleaded guilty in federal court in Houston to conspiring to violate the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act and to conspiring to commit money laundering, the U.S. Justice Department said. He became the 12th person to plead guilty as part of a larger investigation by the Justice Department in a bribery. What the hell is this doing here? This is a phone ad from Israel or something. They're asking if Ryu wants bagels. That became public with the arrest of two Venezuelan businessmen in December 2015. The two men were Roberto Rincon, who was president of Trade Quip Services and Marine, and Abraham Jose Sierra Bastidas, the manager of Vertex Instrumentos. Both pleaded guilty in 2016 to conspiring to pay bribes to secure energy contracts. De Leon is scheduled to be sentenced on September 24th. His lawyers did not respond to requests for comment. So De Leon was arrested in October 2017 in Spain and was extradited to the United States after being indicted along with 4 other former Venezuelan officials on charges they solicited bribes to help offenders win favorable treatment from PDVSA. That's the reality that the leadership over there has formulated. And did they do anything about it? No. An indictment said that from 2011 to 2013, the 5 Venezuelans sought bribes and kickbacks from vendors to help them secure PDVSA contracts and gain priority over other vendors for outstanding invoices during its liquidity crisis. So basically, it's the same type of pay-to-play nonsense that happens all over the world. And it's just a different packaging wherever you go. In one country, it's let's be honest. This happens in countries that are not socialist, too. But being clear, most of those countries are not suffering from crippling famines and lack of basic services and a social meltdown. There are some pretty bad countries that are not socialist, but Venezuela before it was much better than it is now. So I do want to say goodbye. I remember that, to sign off, Augusto Pinochet brought up Lionel Nation's friendship with Caleb Maupin. He didn't remind me, which he was supposed to. Caleb Maupin is a moron. Caleb Maupin is a member of the Workers' World Party, and he's on RT, and that in itself should show you how much of a joke of a person he is. This is a full-fledged communist drawing a check from a company, RT, that is run by the Russian government, which has rejected communism. So, basically, I bet the Russian people, the camera crews, when they go home and they have drinks for the night, they laugh at Caleb Maupin. The man is a joke, and the fact that Lionel likes to say, I talked to Caleb Maupin and he tells me, it's not really, look at how China has prospered due to their adoption of communism and the socialist planned economy. China began to roar into life due to Deng Xiaoping, who abandoned much of this stuff, who abandoned most of the socialist elements of the economy, who opened up the country to Western investment. It literally has nothing to do with if anything, on the contrary. Under Mao, he turned the country basically into a hellhole. And it already was pretty bad, but he made it worse. It was bad under Chiang as well. Chiang Kai-shek was also a big government leader who was trying to modernize the country by force. And maybe they needed somebody like Chiang to come into power and force them along. But he was a horrible leader as well. So Mao came along, he ruined the country even more. Basically drove entire sections of the country into mass famine. I think it was 30 million people died thanks to Mao. But yeah, Caleb Maupin can claim that was a success. Yeah, fucking idiot. Mao died. Okay, and at the time, and actually reading a book about Deng Xiaoping right now. When he died, the country was in almost total chaos. He'd kept the leadership old because, the young generation of people was basically a bunch of zombies. So, Mao basically had around him a number of people like Liu Shaoqi and Zhou Enlai that were fairly competent people, but that he abused and he basically turned them into, torture victims in almost every case. And then when he finally died, another 80-year-old person, I don't know if he was 80 years old by then, but no, he was 72 years old. Deng Xiaoping ended up taking over after a couple of years. And he's the person who saved China from an a short economic meltdown. By opening the markets up. Caleb Maupin is a fucking idiot. And yeah, deport the ginger. And Lionel Nation, yeah, I do like his channel sometimes. I don't follow it nearly as much anymore. I used to watch his channel every day. This doesn't really have to do with Caleb Maupin. But the guy has gone stale. But as for the Caleb Maupin issue, look, we get it. You have weirdo friends, Lionel, that you eat with at the cafeteria at the RT station. You don't have to advertise it, okay? The guy is a complete buffoon, and he's walking around New York City talking about the upcoming communist revolution in America. It's like fuck you. You draw your check from a country that gave up your ideas like 20, 25 years ago. Okay, just go hide in a hole. Okay, that's about it. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Please like it. Please share the video, share the channel, subscribe, and comment below. And have a good Tuesday.